Yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Hi, nice to see you. Welcome to the Tallgrass Prairie Center. And what you're pointing? Oh, and also I want to welcome everyone who's joined us online today. How many people about do we have with us online? 21, excellent. All right. Well, you all can wave to them virtually. I guess we have a camera set up back there so that they can see kind of the whole room and the speaker as well. So we'll be leaving these lights down so we can see the screen, and then the ones in the back will stay open. Before we get going, everybody can hear me okay? Yeah, and everybody online, it seems like they're all right? Okay. So want to introduce a couple of introductions. First of all, Mallory there in the back, Mallory Sage is our relatively new community engagement coordinator, and she organized the meeting today, and assisting her is Jennifer Young, and a Green Iowa AmeriCorps member who's with us for the year from Alabama. So she's surviving so far. And also one of the people parking the cars for you, or Addie, or helping with that, Addie Owen and Christine Nemec. And then Christine is going to be speaking next month on her program, the Iowa Roadside Management Program. And then Justin Meissen there in the back, wave at everyone. Justin is going to be speaking on his research program, and especially with Urban Prairie. So we have a great lineup this semester, taking advantage of all the wonderful talent and knowledge that we have right here at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. And then finally, in June, we'll get together in person for an open house. So please do put that on your calendars for coming out on June 20th, which is the solstice this year. Have I missed any staff members? Oh, Dr. Daryl Smith, founder of the Tallgrass Prairie Center, is sitting right here, and we're so happy to have you here with us today, Daryl. So this seminar series, I believe, and Daryl, maybe you can help us out. We have posters in the back wall going back to 2008. At least, yeah. And there were some breaks in there, right, here and there.
Before we started putting posters out too.
Yeah. So it's at least 17 years old and more than that. So it's a proud tradition. And I want to thank the friends of the Tallgrass Prairie Center, donors to the center, that have helped to make it possible for us to put on this series. So now let me introduce our speaker, Laura Fisher-Walter, who has been with us at the Tallgrass Prairie Center since 2018. Laura was grew up in Kansas and went to Kansas State University, and she got her master's degree in plant ecology at Kansas State, working in the spectacular Flint Hills region of Kansas, which is probably the largest extant tallgrass prairie system left. And then she went on to do a number of other things, like teaching high school, junior high science, working in the library as a children's librarian, and always an avid gardener and native plant aficionado. And then we found her, and she joined the Tallgrass Prairie Center as our plant materials program manager. So we're very excited for Laura to share her work today. So thank you, Laura.
And right back at you. Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate that introduction. And I'm just so happy to have people in this room again. This is really nice. And to be able to also reach out to people who are far away from us. So it's exciting to be able to do these hybrid things. And I really appreciate the work that Mallory and Jennifer and others have done to make it possible to do this in this way. So thanks everybody Laura Jackson said, I'm going to be talking about growing seeds that belong. And so figured it was appropriate to start with a picture of some bags of seeds and all of their diversity and color and form. I'll be talking about all, the range of species that we work with, but I'll also really kind of just zoom in on some stories of what this work is like. So this is not going to be your typical kind of research seminar. This is going to be more, hearkening back to my library days of being more of a storyteller. I should have remembered what our guide was wearing the first time I visited this prairie, which was during the North American Prairie Conference. And that was late June of 2023, I believe. I was really excited to go on one of these field trips because it was in the southern Iowa Drift Plain, an area that I haven't explored as much. And we were going to tour, I think, 3 prairies there, one of which was this one, Rolling Thunder Prairie in Warren County. Our guide met us as we climbed off the bus, and he told us about some of the management activities that go on at this prairie, which included, among other things, managing for blackberry. And then he led us out into the prairie, occasionally breaking trail ahead of us. He was wearing bright orange chainsaw chaps that day to protect his legs. Now, on my second visit to Rolling Thunder Prairie, so this picture was taken in September 2024, this last fall. I was looking for specific plant species of interest that I had taken photos of during that first visit, so that with your phone, there's all these wonderful things you can do. Like you can get a map of all the places that you've taken pictures of, and you get these geolocations. So my student and I, Alex Hansen, who's since graduated, we were out there looking for flowering spurge plants in fruit, which are not the most conspicuous things in the world. And we retraced my old footsteps based on those photographs to a place where that plant had been seen by my own eyes. Did we find it? No, to my disappointment. We did find other things, and this often happens. We found another species that was in fruit, and we managed to collect some seeds of that. And so it was not a total loss. Now, from that first time visiting this prairie, there were several things that I did remember. One was the absolutely stunning views of that prairie. There were multitude of species in bloom. We were just kind of, gobsmacked the whole time. There were gorgeous insects visiting those flowers. And there were some species that were less commonly found, and we would just kind of cluster around them like the bugs themselves and admire them and chatter about them. So I remembered a lot of things, but I should have remembered the chainsaw chaps. Alex was very kind to remind me about that. I don't know, have you ever tried walking through blackberries? I mean, it's one thing if you can see them. It's another thing if it's September and the sawtooth sunflowers are this high and the Indian grass is up to your eyeballs and you're pushing through those stems and you can't see the blackberry. But we got through, and as you can tell, so I don't know if you can see Alex in that picture, but I'm going to step away from the mic for a moment and show you where he is. There he is. So he got away, he got out. He was rather happy about that at that time. So this, I tell this story not just because I want you to feel sorry for us for having had to recover from all the scratches that we had, or actually I didn't wear those same jeans today. Admire the scratches on our jeans that it still exists. But I wanted you to just get a glimpse of one of the experiences that we've had in traversing remnant prairies, looking for seed of species for the plant materials program at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. Here's another experience we had recently. This was last fall at Cedar Prairie in Guthrie County. And here you can see that Alex, he's wading through the lowlands with the bag in his hand that has precious fruits of flowering spurge in it. So at this prairie, we were successful, and we came back with collections of the species that we were targeting. And I'm chasing a mouse today. Aha, I caught it. All right. So collections like these are the starting point for growing seeds that belong, which I chose as the title for this talk. And we do this for the Tallgrass Prairie Center, where we are currently sitting, some of us, not you remote folks. This is one of the programs that helps us work toward our overall mission, which is to empower people to value and restore resilient, diverse tallgrass prairie. Here on the UNI campus, at the west end of campus, past the Unidome, we manage 60 acres of university land for seed production, for restoration, and for research. The restoration part of our mission means that we need seeds. We need diverse seeds that are appropriate to our region for a variety of purposes, for bringing prairie back. So a quick definition or two as we get started. I'll be talking about remnant prairies often, and many of you may be familiar with this term and really know what it means. But to be clear, these are the remainders of this once extensive ecosystem that covered most of Iowa prior to Euro-American settlement. The rich soils created by these prairies were almost entirely converted to agricultural row crops within a few decades of settlement, leaving these mostly small, isolated patches. Kind of a sad story for those of us who love prairies. But these remnants that we have are incredibly important. And not just as living, beautiful reminders of what was once here. We can use these as reference systems to tell us what we can shoot for in restoring prairies and planting them, restoring the plant and animal communities and the ecological functions of prairies to our landscape. And these prairies provide the raw material, the literal seeds for that restoration. Seeds from remnant prairies like this one are the basis for how we develop Iowa ecotypes in the plant materials program at the TPC. Now, ironically, I've never collected seed from this prairie in Winneshiek County because seed collecting is not allowed at this prairie. And I think probably I could ask for special permission for that purpose, but instead I love just to visit this place and just admire it. Before we talk about the process of collecting and developing Iowa ecotype seed, we need to go back a little bit into history. And here's where it's great. We've got Daryl Smith in the room, so he could probably take over this part. But we have a much longer program then than we planned for. So I'm going to give you the nutshell version of this. Hopefully it's not too nutty. There was legislation passed in Iowa in 1988 which established Integrated Roadside Vegetation Management, or IRVM, because the rest of it's a mouthful, as the way the roadsides alongside our state and federal highways would be managed, and counties were allowed to opt in. A fund called the Iowa Living Roadway Trust Fund was established to support those efforts. And we are grateful to this day for LRTF for providing the majority of the grant funding for the plant materials program and some other programs at the center. IRVM provides cost savings to our state by reducing mowing and spraying of roadside vegetation and by promoting the establishment of long-lived, resilient, low-maintenance native vegetation following construction along our transportation corridors. Planting new vegetation like this crew is doing with hydroseeding obviously requires seed. And the amount of seed needed for revegetating large highway projects is greater than could be reasonably or responsibly collected from remnant prairies. But when IRVM was first established in Iowa, few species of native seeds were available to purchase, especially at the scale needed. And most of what was available was cultivars of native grasses that were developed in other states for other purposes like grazing or hay. And don't even get us started on where the wildflower seed was coming from. It was, like horticultural cultivars from Holland. Successful IRVM would require a new effort to grow seeds that belong. And this effort started 35 years ago as the Iowa Ecotype Project. In 1990, Daryl Smith himself and others got a grant from LRTF to establish the Iowa Ecotype Project, an effort to increase the availability of diverse, regionally adapted native seed for roadside restoration. That first year, they worked with partners around the state to collect samples of seed of 3 key species. You can see there's Canada wild rye, upper left, side oats grama to the right, and round-headed bush clover down here to the left. Collections came from numerous remnant prairies across 3 zones that, as you can see, roughly divided the state in thirds, north to south. In each subsequent year, more species were collected. One of our goals as we collect seed from remnant prairies, and I believe this has been since the establishment of the program, is to avoid over collecting seed from remnant prairies. We collect small amounts and then increase that seed by growing out plants and harvesting their seed. That way we can take that genetic legacy from remnant prairies and make it available for planting new prairies without placing additional stress on the remnants. Our remnant collections can each fit in envelopes or paper sacks, like this sample of Pedicularis lanceolata. We give it a shorthand of Pedlan from Fairbank Fen. And even the harvests from our production plots are usually only a few pounds at most. So a plan through this Iowa Ecotype project was devised to get stock seed grown from remnant seed into the hands of private native seed growers who could then produce and sell seed at the scale needed for the DOT. First, the TPC collaborated with a USDA Plant Materials Center in Ellsbury, Missouri, to grow plots of each ecotype and produce stock seed that could be released to native seed growers. And later on, UNI provided access to campus land for the TPC production plots, and that's where they are today. This image shows a field of Iowa Ecotype Zone 1 rough blazing star that was in flower just a few months ago in the fields that you could walk to from here. And you are welcome to walk along the trails and view these different species coming into flower at different times. You're also invited to attend our summer open house that Laura Jackson mentioned. So on June 20th, whatever's blooming then, which should be a lot of cool things, you'll be able to view. To ensure that that seed sold as Iowa Source really deserves that label, another organization joined this partnership. The Iowa Crop Improvement Association manages a native species program through which seed growers can apply to have their seed certified. In return for that honor of wearing a yellow tag like this, the seed growers must provide records of the stock seed or the original seed collections they used in planting their fields and maps documenting where those field locations are. And they have to allow an inspector to visit their fields, usually a couple times annually, to cover the blooming seasons of all the different species they grow. And then that certified source identified seed can be labeled with that yellow tag. When seed is purchased for state or county roadside use, the seed with the yellow tag floats to the top because it's given a bid preference in that purchase process. The first Iowa Ecotype Project stock seed was provided to native seed growers in 1994. Since then, we have released 87 species to growers, and we have developed stock seed of 99 species total. So here's a little sampling of some of the diversity that we have produced, which includes wildflowers, grasses, sedges, and even some prairie shrubs like this one down here in the lower right. That's, lower left. That's Amorpha fruticosa or false indigo bush. For many species, there are 3 zones available, and we have released a total of 160 zone ecotypes of seed. Partly because of just the way the market works, not all of these species or ecotypes are still available on the market today. However, because we manage a seed bank with nearly every ecotype the program has ever produced, they could come back when there's demand. We have that capacity. And this is what that looks like. So this is not the most colorful picture of my whole talk. I get it. But it's important because this is the seed bank. It has 3 levels. There are remnant collections reserved seed, and available stock seed. So we have about 3,000 small collections of remnant seed housed in that -20 Celsius freezer, the kind of the upright freezer that's actually made, it's a lab freezer. These are the samples that remain after we use a few hundred seeds from each collection to start production plots. And those are in just little vials and envelopes. So they're tiny little samples of seeds. So there's a lot of them in that freezer. A second freezer, it looks just a lot like that one, it's a clone of it, houses reserved seed that was held back from earlier harvests of first generation production fields. So when we grow the seed from remnant prairies, then that makes a first generation production plot. And some of that seed from those early harvests is saved. We use that seed to start new fields and thereby refresh the stock seed we have available for growers. Finally, we use the walk-in cooler you see there on the right to house the stock seed that's harvested from our fields. We found that most seed remains viable for about 5 to 10 years and sometimes far longer under the conditions in our walk-in cooler, which are basically refrigerator temperature and relatively low humidity. When our supply in the cooler runs low or the seed declines in quality based on seed testing results that we get, we refresh that seed by growing new fields from that first generation seed. Okay, back to color, which I know we all need to see right now. It's an odd winter. Anyway, we manage around 80 active certified fields at any given time. Many of those are refreshing that first generation seed and getting our stock seed bank back in shape. But we currently have about a dozen fields that were started, their first generation fields started from collections we've made in remnant prairies over the past 3 or so years. And this one is an example of that. This is a field of American water horehound, or Lycopus americanus, which is a native species in the mint family that likes wet prairies and sedge meadows. I'm going to use some of the new species that we're growing to illustrate more about this process of what goes into choosing species, collecting seed, and then growing them in our fields. From the start, the Iowa Ecotype project focused on bringing species to the seed market that were native to Iowa prairies and likely to be useful on roadsides. A number of those species are visible in this view of our roadside planting that's right next to this building, which will be beautiful in June, just like this. Roadside vegetation needs to meet several criteria. It should not impede visibility, but should control erosion, compete against weeds, provide aesthetic beauty, and provide habitat for wildlife such as birds and insects. And roadsides can be challenging places to get seeds established and get plants to persist. The earliest species chosen for the program were generally widespread across the state, present in numerous remnant prairies, demonstrating their persistence and resilience in the face of all the changes that had occurred. 35 years later, we are still making collections of new species, but the process of choosing them is a little bit more complicated. We have to identify gaps in the market, species that are not already available as Iowa Source identified material that would be beneficial for restoration, especially on roadsides. Luckily, a couple of doors down from my office is the office of my colleague, Justin Meissen, who's sitting at the back of the room today. He's the TPC Research and Restoration Program Manager, and his work requires purchasing seed as well as planting it and monitoring the results. And so I get lots of good intel by just going to Justin's doorway and interrupting him at whatever he's doing and say, "Hey, Justin, what are you up to? What are you thinking about? Or do you know about this one thing? Or what should I grow next?" And so sometimes I just listen to what he's working on. And it's just great. So a couple of years ago, he mentioned a species of native cool season grass in the genus Bromus that he could purchase for his restoration and research projects, but the nearest source he could get it from was northwestern Minnesota. And he's like, "This thing is native to Iowa. Why don't we have Iowa Source Bromus kalmii, also known as Arctic brome?" And yeah, that is a native species in the same genus as smooth brome. And if you are a prairie person, you know that's not our friend. But this one is. This is a native species. It behaves well. Justin's been planting it in mixes since 2016. And he took me to see one of the demonstration sites where he planted it. And that's it. There it is, right there. That's Bromus kalmii, Arctic brome, and it's growing and setting seed beautifully in a prairie strip in a cornfield that was seeded, what, like 2016, I think. Yeah. So along with Justin's recommendation, I remembered something that roadside managers had said to me at a meeting that my colleague Christine had organized. They said they could use more native cool season grasses in mixes in hopes that those would compete with some of the non-native cool season grasses we have trouble with. So a plot began to form. Once I've settled on a species that I think I might want to collect, I need to locate potential sites for collection, develop my skills at field identification, and determine what is likely to be good timing for collection. So this is desk work. I consult different identification guides. I look up known records of this species, including the maps from the Biota of North America program, which is called BONAP for short, a lot easier to say. I also reach out to collaborators around the state at the DNR, the USDA, county conservation boards, nonprofits like Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation and the Nature Conservancy, and just let people know that I'm looking for a particular species. Of course, it's easier to get information about common, more familiar species. If everybody knows what it looks like, they can tell you where they've seen it. But Bromus kalmii did not fit those criteria. Though you can see from the map that it is, the light green patches on the map indicate the counties in which there are at least historic records of this species occurring. So it's not exactly rare in Iowa. Luckily, John Pearson and Mark Luschke at the Iowa DNR, they're botanists and they knew about the species and they helpfully supplied me with species lists from some of the prairies that they manage, and also the information about specific locations where it had been seen that were recorded on herbarium sheets. Okay, show of hands, anybody know what a herbarium is? Okay, so herbarium is a collection of pressed specimens of plants with identification information, location information, hopefully, the date that it was collected and something about the ecology of the place that it was collected from. When plant taxonomists work, they rely heavily upon these collections to help them understand how plants are related and how to identify them and name them. Me personally, I'm interested in that location information and some aspects of that ecology so I can locate the populations for collecting. And that's some of the information that you can find in this description. Like this is pulled from a Bromus kalmii herbarium specimen. And this collection was made in July 4th of 2007 by Mark Luschke himself in Cerro Gordo County at Claybanks Forest State Preserve. And he provides all kinds of information about it. He says, a several acre severely eroded mesic prairie occurs on a steep northwest facing slope above the river and below a gently moderately sloping mesic prairie on the preserve and private land to the west. Most of the prairie is on private land. This is going to become significant later. Below the soil are limey shale and limestone. Bromus kalmii is infrequent on the entire prairie slope. And then he tells a list of the kinds of plants that were found around with it, which is also very useful information because when you see those plants, you're like, okay, I could be in the right area. As word gets out that I'm looking for a species, sometimes I get really wonderful surprises, like getting a text with a photo of a plant and the question, is this the species you're looking for? That's what happened when my friend Tony Vorwald from Jackson County Conservation discovered a patch of brome in a hill prairie that he and his crews had been working on. This was a remnant prairie that had been overgrown with trees. And Bromus kalmii is just one of many prairie species that have rebounded since his crew worked on this site and did a lot of brush clearing. Tony brought me an envelope of seed from that Ozark Ridge prairie, and the resulting plants are now growing in with other collections together in a production plot at the TPC. Once we know, or we think we know where to look, we need to go to the sites and find the plants. For some species, this means a couple of trips. Once when the species is in flower and therefore more visible and easy to find, and then again later when it's in fruit. With Bromus kalmii, we could combine the steps of finding the plants and collecting the seed, since it's most visible when it's in fruit. And it also holds on to its seeds for several weeks. You can see some of it here in this picture, just kind of almost silhouetted against the trunk of that oak. Its remaining populations are also in some of the most beautiful places in Iowa. This site is Heritage Valley. It's an INHF property. It's not normally open to the public in Alameda County, but I like going to their seed collecting events. So I just volunteer there, and I'm assigned a species or two to collect, and I go and collect that. And on this occasion, I happened to collect, well, I didn't happen to, I told them I was collecting Bromus kalmii seed and that I would like to take some of it back for the TPC's programs. And I was just floored when at the end of the day, I went to hand in my bag of Bromus kalmii and they said, why don't you just keep it all? So the generosity of a lot of our partners and collaborators in this project is just amazing. Offspring of this population are also now growing in the TPC production plots. My student Alex went on several of the collecting trips with me last year, and I hope he watches this because he occasionally questioned the process. Mark Leschke had warned me that many of the sites where Bromus kalmii occurs in eastern Iowa are these hill prairies or bluff prairies that are becoming increasingly threatened by shrub and tree encroachment. And Alex and I found that to be the case when we visited a couple of these prairies. One of these was in Backbone State Park, so hence the photo of the Backbone, where we searched, and this was based on a herbarium record where I quote, along the mossy, grassy edge of the Hogsback. We struggled to find any grassy areas left due to the trees growing on both sides of that Hogsback Trail. And finally, Alex just kind of got fed up with it. He asked me why I thought that the Bromus should be there. And I said that there was a herbarium record from, I think it was 1997. And his response was along the lines of, you mean to tell me we've just spent 2 hours of our lives looking for something that was last seen here before I was born? And I'm like, yeah. And then a few steps later down the trail, we found a little patch of it, as you can see right there. Yeah, Alex was quite, he was a wonderful companion on some of these trips. He was up for any kind of adventure. And one of these sites provided one of the most memorable collecting experiences I have ever had. If you know me, you've probably heard this story before, but don't stop me. I'm going to tell it anyway. Mark had told us about that potential collecting spot in Claybanks Forest State Preserve, and I read you that information from the herbarium specimen, right? And this was the westernmost collection location that we had identified. And so I was really excited and eager to get a sample from this population because everything else we collected or gotten samples of was from kind of far eastern Iowa, closer to the Mississippi. So I called up the County Conservation Board because I get permission from the entities that manage these prairies to make sure that they know who's doing what on their land. And the director there informed me that the site was inaccessible except by traveling about 1/4 mile down the Winnebago River due to private property on either side of the part of the preserve that we needed to collect from. So if you look at the little map in the inset top right there, you can see that the yellow outlined preserve is in 3 parcels. And of course, the Bromus kalmii couldn't be decent enough to be in one of the parcels that has road access. It had to be in the middle one with nothing but river access. But, well, it was a drought year. And the Conservation Board director said the river is low. You might be able to wade there. We were up for that. So we borrowed waders from the UNI biology department. We drove over to Cerro Gordo County and we parked in that parcel that's, kind of the lower left in the map and hiked through the woods with the waders over our shoulders. Had to kind of skitter down a bluff and then put on our waders and hike down the river. It was beautiful. What a great time. And we waded all the way to the bluffs where Mark had located those plants 16 years before. So at least this time within Alex's lifespan. So these are steep eroded banks, as Mark had warned us, of soft shale with occasional limestone outcrops. And even wearing hip waders, or actually those are chest waders. Alex bounded up him like a mountain goat, and I like crawled and carefully pulled myself up and made it to the top. But what we found was that the remnant prairie on the bluff top was really severely degraded by buckthorn and red cedar encroachment. So Alex kind of stayed in mountain goat mode on the slopes while I was poking around in the prairie at the top trying to find some vestiges of it. And pretty soon I hear, I found it! I found it! I found the Bromus calmii! And he had actually located a few plants on one of those little limestone ledges where you could take a break from clambering around. Soon we had found several more patches, and on the way back up the river, we located another even larger population on another bank. So we were excited to find more than one population in this area because when we locate a species, we try to collect as genetically diverse and representative a sample of seed as we can from that population. Whenever possible, we collect a portion of the seed from 50 or more individual plants across a site. When a population is large, this means walking across the area, stopping every few strides, and then picking a portion of the seed from each of the plants that are near you. In smaller populations like that Bromus and clay banks, it means we might sample a portion of the seed from every one of the plants we encounter. When you're collecting seed from remnant prairies, it's really helpful to have a team. And here's Mallory in a previous role as an AmeriCorps member helping out with one of these collecting expeditions. Fanning out across the site helps you to find as many individual plants as possible, which is especially important when looking for small or inconspicuous plants. On this day, we were looking for, well, there was one that we were looking for that was very inconspicuous, but at this particular patch, we were looking for a mint, a pink flowered species called Stachys pilosa or hairy hedge nettle. And it's not the littlest plant, but when it is midsummer and the grasses and sedges are tall around it, it can hide quite a bit. But with the help of a crew, we were able to locate enough plants to make a good collection from that site. I'm always grateful when our students and our AmeriCorps members and volunteers come along and collecting trips. And I think it's a mutual feeling. I think they enjoy that experience a lot. To visit multiple remnant prairies is an amazing, amazing day. After drying and cleaning the collected seed and weighing it and recording all the collecting information, the next step is to figure out how to grow it. So I go back to my desk and I consult guides online and books on my shelf and, email people I know. And often the closest information I can find is for members of the same genus, and that's a starting point. Luckily, Bromus calmii turned out to be very easy to grow from seed, as are many of the cool season grasses. And Alex was soon busy in the greenhouse transplanting hundreds of tiny seedlings that he clearly felt a great deal of ownership of as he was moving them from the germ trays into individual plug cells. Not all species are as trouble-free to grow. One of the gaps that we've identified in the native seed market is the availability of hemiparasitic species. These are plants that parasitize other plants to get some of the resources that they need. And they're present in most remnant prairies. The white flowers in this picture are swamp lousewort, a common hemiparasite of wet prairies that here is growing together with sedges, grasses, and great blue lobelia. And the yellow flowers are of common sneezeweed.
Can you remind me what the INHF stands for?
Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. Yeah, the INHF is that organization, amazing organization that's a land trust that's statewide. They own and manage a number of remnant prairies. So for local folks, if you knew Bruce Stiles, this is his prairie, the prairie that he nurtured and protected for many years, which is now under permanent protection and is named for his grandmother, Addie King. Hemiparasites, though they're common in remnant prairies, are rare in planted prairies, partly because the seed is expensive or hard to get hold of, and partly because it may just be difficult to establish them, and there's not a lot of information on how to successfully do that. I'd seen posts, though, about propagating two hemiparasitic species, this one, swamp lousewort, and another one called wood batony, in plugs for transplanting. These were by Luke Dahlberg on the Grassland Restoration Network blog. And I wanted to see if we could take some, amalgam of the techniques that Luke had used and translate to that to successful seed production plots. At least for the swamp lousewort, the answer so far is yes, it's successful, though it's a little more complicated than growing a typical forb. While waiting for the lousewort seed to go through 90 days of cold moist treatment to break its dormancy, we had to start trays of plug pots with 1 or 2 species of, well, each had 1 of 2 species of sedges in them to use as host plants. When the lousewort seeds were ready, or we thought they would be, we used a dropper to seed 2 to 3 seeds per little host sedge plant. And to my surprise, the lousewort germinated well, and most of the plugs ended up with at least 1 of these darling little lousewort seedlings in them. I say darling, of course they're vicious parasites, but they're really cute. Now, one of the sedge species though grew so quickly that it soon shaded out some of its parasites with its dense foliage. We ended up having to give those rather severe haircuts frequently, so that one of our AmeriCorps members decided that she was going to tell her parents that what she'd been doing was mowing lawns with scissors. The other sedge, though, was a more generous host, and the survival of the hemiparasites was the spiral rate was higher in those plugs. They transplanted to our fields well. You can see they flowered like crazy this summer, and the buzzing of the bumblebees that were visiting them was amazing, and it was a happy sound to me because I knew that meant pollination was happening. And we ended up with about 6.5 pounds of the swamp lousewort seed from about 1,000 square feet of row space. Very excited about that result. Now, the other hemiparasite species that we have in trial right now is wood betony, or Pedicularis canadensis. And thanks to Tony Vorwald, my friend in Jackson County, for this picture showing how important the species is for bumblebees. When the bumblebees first emerge in spring, the queen bees are on their own, and they have to gather the resources they need to establish a new colony. And it's early blooming species like this that provide them with those resources. So we don't know yet if this species is going to do as well in production, and it has caused some headaches already. So it's a species that blooms early, and it sets seed early, and it releases its seed in early June. So we inferred that the seeds might need some exposure to warm temperatures, followed by cold temperatures, to break their dormancy and get them to germinate. But I didn't have as much time to work with as I wanted, so we just had a few weeks of warm temperatures followed by a longer cold period, and we seeded them into the host plugs just like we did the swamp lousewort that worked, and we got like 3 seedlings out of several hundred plugs. It was very disappointing. We didn't throw the host plugs away though. I figured that having some sedge plugs around could be useful for something else. So we put them in our equipment shed, which is not heated in the winter, and let them overwinter in there. We have to go out there and water occasionally to keep things alive. But by March of this year, we were able to set them back outside. And by April and May, what we were seeing in those plugs are the little purplish seedlings that you see in that little inset picture. They came up the second year. So before we moved them out to production plots, our AmeriCorps members helped me count the plugs that had the parasite seedlings in them. And we found out that there were between 9 and 46 plugs out of 50 that had the betony seedlings in them. So that 46, that's a pretty high percentage. An average was 60% of the sedges had a little hemiparasite with them. So those are out in the field now, overwintering, I hope, despite the drought and the cold. And we're trying again. We have more flats of sedges out in the shed this year that were seeded with seed from more remnant prairies. And fingers crossed, it works again. But if there's anything that these species teach us over and over again, it's not only that you need patience, but you got to have humility, because you think you've got something that works, and the next time, the next batch of seed is different, and the next year is different, and things don't always work that same way. For any species that we grow, we plant several collections from across a zone in a field together to start an Iowa ecotype. Most of our production plots start from seed that's collected in 6 to 12 remnant prairies. As I mentioned before, we try to get representative and diverse collections from within each prairie that we sample, and then we combine the plants in the plots, allowing them to cross-pollinate. Sometimes the plants visibly display their diversity, as do these Iowa ecotype long-backed spiderwort plants with their showy flowers of so many. They have a lot of variation in color and form of those flowers. But much of the diversity within the species is not visible. We work hard to retain both the visible and invisible diversity as we grow and harvest these species. At each step along the process, we try to identify and avoid ways in which we might be intentionally or unintentionally deciding which individual plants are winners or losers, thereby choosing some traits and eliminating others from the population. Why go to all this trouble? To produce seed that retains the genetic legacy of Iowa prairies, those hundreds to thousands of years of adaptation, while also being diverse enough to be adaptable to various planting locations and resilient to changing conditions. So this is also what we mean by growing seed that belongs. You might reasonably ask, and I tell you, we do too, what it means to grow seeds that belong when our climate is changing rapidly. We don't fully understand at this point how plant populations will need to adapt or move in response to all these changes. I mean, we've seen changes in precipitation patterns, in temperature regimes, in growing seasons, and the abundance or scarcity of pollinators and other organisms that our plants interact with and depend on. I mean, this winter, come on. However, seed of diverse species, and that's also genetically diverse within the species, gives us the best chance of planting prairies that will be able to adapt to future conditions. And really, I think this is one of the most important things. Knowing where seed comes from, having source identified seed available should give us the tools to make informed decisions about where to use that seed as our conditions and our knowledge about what to do change. So a crucial step in our seed production process is, of course, the harvest. And this is one of those steps where it's really important to consider your harvest timing and the methods that you use to avoid unintentional selection. So we harvest our seed from our production plots either by hand or mechanically, depending on the characteristics of each species. Some, like milkweeds and wild strawberries, need to be hand harvested every other day or so to capture the full range of diversity in their ripening times and to avoid loss to dispersal by wind in the case of the milkweeds or animals in the case of the strawberries, not to mention the pickers themselves. And strawberries require special processing techniques. So on the right, you can see Maddie was demonstrating. She's one of the students who worked with us last summer. That's a bit like making a smoothie, only one that you wouldn't want to drink. You pour the resulting slurry into a bucket, and the heavy seed settles out to the bottom. The unfilled seed in the pulp floats. You pour that off, and you've got pretty much clean seed down there at the bottom. You just have to dry it out. It's amazing. So really easy to grow, really easy to clean that seed. It's a species that's present in almost every remnant prairie, okay, or at least based on the data, over 50% of them. And it's almost never found in planted prairies. Why? Check out the size of that berry. Those are my fingers. So they're tiny. We collected over the 2 weeks and change that this seed was, or this fruit was ripening. We collected 12 pounds of berries off of our field. So you can imagine 12 pounds of those little teeny tiny raisin-sized berries. And after doing the blender smoothies and collecting and cleaning that seed, we ended up with 5.5 ounces of seed. Yeah. So all of the labor, particularly the labor in the picking, is the reason why the seed is so expensive that people don't put it in mixes because they don't want to pay for it. I really think it ought to be out there. So Justin may talk about this in his talk, but he got a sample of the seed from the plant materials program, and he put it in one of the mixes at Urban Prairie. He knows how many seeds there were in that little packet of seed that he got. He knows how much land he put it on, and he'll be monitoring that site to see how many plants come up. So we will be able to tell you in a couple of years, this is how much you need to put in your mix to be able to get strawberries in your planting for all their wonderful benefits. I mean, I could talk about strawberries all day, but I will stop. Species with seeds or fruits that are less prone to blowing away or falling off or being eaten can stand in the field until they've ripened. And then we get to have some of, besides going out to remnant prairies and doing wonderful things like that, one of our most favorite things is running the plot combine and harvesting seed. Like here's some roundhead Lespedeza that we grew in the matrix of Indian grass. And we were able to combine that and clean that successfully. Sometimes we'll harvest all or part of a field by hand and allow it to dry in a tarp in a protected spot, like in our shed or in our shop. And then we take this dried material and park the combine out on the concrete and fork the material into the combine to help us thresh that material and make it easier to clean. And speaking of cleaning, when people ask me what we do during the winter, a lot of it is cleaning the seed that came off of our production plots. And this happens in that seed cleaning lab where we have machines that help us to separate the pure seed from all the material that comes in from the harvest, which is, crushed plant parts and dust and dirt, but also, things like insect frass and the crushed insects themselves. We keep records of all the processes that work for cleaning seed of every species that we work with. And then every year we do troubleshooting because every year is a little bit different and every batch of seed is a little bit different. And this provides my students and me lots of opportunities for troubleshooting and problem solving and creativity. Speaking of those records that we keep of all the things that worked and didn't work, we can add those to the species production guides that we produce and are using to update the native seed production manual. So the predecessor in my position, Greg House-Seal, had written a native seed production manual that was printed and widely used. And now we are adding that material plus new species to the electronic version on our website. And that's an ongoing project that helps keep us busy in the winter months. The clean seed that we get out of the seed lab is stored in that walk-in seed cooler until it is released to native seed growers as stock seed. And this is valuable, having this, because it reduces the effort and risk to growers of trying to grow new species or replanting fields that are in decline. So even though these are perennial plants, over time their seed production can decrease and people need to replace those fields. And we're ready to help them do that. One of the ways that we know all of this is working is when every year our equipment shed gets emptied out in late spring and it gets filled with pallets of seed that are destined for county roadsides. My colleague Christine Nemec, who's going to talk in a later talk in this series, gives a bid preference to certified Iowa seed when she makes those seed purchases. And the result is that I think over 80% of the seed that she's able to release to counties can be traced back to Iowa remnant prairies. The Iowa DOT has similar guidelines for their seed purchases used along state and federal highways. You can see those yellow tags on the bags there, and those indicate that source identified certification on the seed bags in the picture. And also when you drive around our state and you notice the colorful wildflowers in bloom on the roadsides, you can be assured that many of those plants grew from seeds that belong. So the plant materials program has a few other roles besides all of that work in gathering and growing seed and making it available. We organize meetings and provide technical information. We want to improve communication and information sharing across the native seed supply chain, because the business of growing seed is foundational to our ability to purchase and plant it. We want to make sure that that native seed supply chain is functioning well. We also participate in shared projects at the Tallgrass Prairie Center. The Plant Materials Program provides seedlings of difficult to grow species to transplant at Urban Prairie, the restoration and research project that Justin will be highlighting in his talk in this series. And here you can see these are students from Union LaPorte High School, and they were helping us transplant about 2,000 seedling plugs at Urban Prairie last spring. Really fun for them to get out of the classroom late in the year and fun for us to interact with them and get those planted. You may have seen these prairie root specimens at nature centers or museums. They are a wonderful teaching tool to help people learn about the value of prairies, and that is one of the things that we coordinate as well. Every summer we have the root pull, where we extract those from the ground and clean them and get them ready. And altogether, you can imagine this is a lot of work. And pretty ambitious goals. And the Plant Materials Program is just me, a full-time person, and a part-time student assistant. So we couldn't do all of this without a lot of other hands. And so we're very grateful to many people who spend a lot of hours helping us out. And this is our colleagues, AmeriCorps members, summer teacher externs like Jason Lang in the bottom right there, who's also here in the audience today, and also community volunteers, and our collaborators at the various conservation agencies and nonprofits. And you can be involved too. There are ways that you can help ensure that seeds that belong continue to be available for planting prairies in Iowa and around the region. If you buy seed to plant a prairie, ask where it comes from. Not just where it was grown, but the original source that seed came from. The more that seed growers hear that question, the more they will know it's important to us as seed buyers. They'll know that it matters. And get to know the remnant prairies, savannas, and wetlands near you. Even though we're always working to get better at planting prairies, none of our reconstructions can match the diversity and intricacy of a remnant prairie. When exploring, though, make sure you wear appropriate clothing. Not always chainsaw chaps, but jeans are good. Find out who takes care of your local remnant ecosystems, and find out if they have the resources and the person power that they need. Speaking of person power, get together with other people who share your concerns and your passion for prairie. Contribute your time, your talents, or your funds to organizations that protect and care for remnant prairies, or who provide resources to other land stewards. Together, we can make sure that the remnant prairies, where it all started, can persist, and that we can continue to get better at planting seeds that belong. So thank you all for being here today, whether online or in person. I know I practiced this and it was not this long, but I'm willing to stay and answer questions if you're willing to. And I can't offer cookies to those people who are online, but I'm happy to answer your questions.
Want to take questions?
Yeah, yeah, here we go.
How host plants work for the parasites?
Ooh, that's such a cool question. So for those of you who are online, she asked, how do the host plants work for the plants that are parasites? The plants that are parasitic have, in this case, they have specialized structures in their root system called haustoria, Haustoria, that actually link into the root system of the host plant, and they're able to withdraw water and nutrients from the host root system. Yeah. So the pedicularis anyway that we're working with, these louseworts and betonies, they're green plants. They have the capacity to do photosynthesis, but apparently they're getting water and mineral nutrients from their hosts. And it's interesting to look at that plot where we've got the swamp lousewort growing with its sedge host, and you can see in the plots that have really abundant, strong growth of the swamp lousewort, those little sedges are they look kind of peaked, as my grandma would have said. Yeah. Do we have a
question online asks which sedge species were used for the pedicularis?
Okay, those two sets, we chose two sedge species that we had in stock in the seed bank and that are known to occur in wetlands. and wet prairies in Iowa. So we figured they were things that would potentially co-occur with a Pedicularis in nature and that could grow in an irrigated plot alongside them and potentially be hosts. And so the two species we chose were Carex bebii and Carex hystracina. So those are Beb sedge and porcupine sedge. And it was the porcupine sedge that has functioned better as a host so far in our experience. Though I haven't written off the bed sedge. That was the one that grew so densely in the greenhouse that it shaded out the little pedicularis seedlings. But I think that might have just been the timing at which we, started the sedges and started the seeds of the pedicularis that resulted in that. I'm not sure. So it'd be worth further exploration. But the porcupine sedge worked great, at least so far. We'll see how long they last in the field. Yeah.
So back to the parasitics.
Oh my gosh, everybody loves the parasites. They're so cool.
So the swamp louse, whatever it is.
Yeah, swamp lousewort. It's a great word.
You had trouble growing. It grew the second year because after you put it in the storage shed, right? But was it a parasite on the other plant that was a parasitic at that point? And that's why it sprouted and grew?
Oh, it's such a good question. So I think you're asking about the one that didn't grow as well. That was the second species of Pedicularis. That one, whether it was already acting as a parasite during that time it was sitting in the shed in those sedge plugs. I think the answer is no. I think that it was just the seeds were still sitting there. So the seeds are funny things. They, especially these prairie species, they have inborn mechanisms to keep them from germinating at the wrong time. Because it wouldn't make any sense for a seed to germinate in the middle of, the winter or right before winter, and then it would just die. So they have this inbred dormancy, and depending on the species, it takes different things to break that dormancy. And a lot of our prairie species, all you have to do is have them be moist and cold for a month to 4 months, and they'll germinate. But a few of these things, especially these species that release their seed in spring to early summer, may need a longer period of warm temperatures followed by the cold temperatures to germinate, or it might even be a couple rounds through that cycle before they'll germinate. I haven't tried everything with that species yet, so I don't know for sure. I haven't really done a rigorous scientific study on it, but we just found one thing that worked this one time.
In that photograph of the students or AmeriCorps people picking them out, there was 2 girls and a guy at trays pulling them out of the.
Oh yeah, they were counting. They were pulling out little weeds that had come up in the same pots, and they were also counting the number of seedlings that were there because I wanted to see how many seedlings had come up for each of the remnant prairies that were represented in those trays.
Was that lousewort in there?
That was the second species. That was the Canadian lousewort is one of the names for it. Wood betony is another name. And so that was that difficult species, and they were counting the actual seedlings that had come up.
It was a surprise to you, right?
It was, yeah, it was a
parasitic at that point.
yes. But then fairly early as seedlings, they probably form those connections to that host plant. Mm-hmm.
I don't know, parasites fascinating.
No, I think parasites are fascinating in general. They're just super cool. Yeah, Mallory, is there another online question?
The sedge species that were mentioned for Pedicularis, were those the same sedges for wood betony, or were they different?
They were different. The wood betony is not a wetland species. I wasn't expecting to grow it under irrigation, and so we chose some host species for that one that would tolerate more of our music to dry production sites. So we have some of those with little blue stem, some of the Canadian lousewort, the Pedicularis canadensis. Some of them are with little blue stem, some are with Cytodes grama, and some are with Carex brevior. Brevior, trying to think of shortbeak sedge. Sometimes it takes me a while to come up with the English names. It's weird. It's just whatever language you're used to. You know? Yeah, Daryl.
As a prairie restorationist, I'm excited about those parasitic plants because that's something that we don't very commonly are able to do. But do you ever see that becoming a part of the roadside mixture?
Okay, so Daryl voiced his excitement for having hemiparasites available for restoration work as a restorationist, but wonders how useful they might be in roadside mixes or whether they would be adopted for use in roadside mixes. I think that might be another case where we might need to look at some proof of principle where we could do some test plantings and see if we can get it established. I know that at least one roadside manager, former roadside manager, has told me that he had seen ditches with swamp lousewort in them. So it'll persist in ditches. It's a question of whether you can get it established in a planted seed mix, since these things seem to have requirement for a host. How do you get them started when there's nothing else growing in the area already? So it'll be interesting if we can get some folks to try this stuff out for us. I mean, we have 6.5 pounds of swamp lousewort seed now. We might have enough to play with and see what works. Yeah, Laura Jackson.
Maybe you can just share the reason that people are really interested in these hemiparasites in terms of
Their
evening
ecology.
out the plant competition with the more aggressive species.
Okay, I think you just asked and answered a question at the same time. So, but for those who are online, the question is, could I explain why people are so interested in these hemiparasites because of their ecological role and in their potential for evening out the competition among plant species. So you sometimes hear people talk about the dominant grasses in prairies, and it is thought that by tapping into those host plants, that the hemiparasites can maybe make those dominant plants a little bit less dominant. And that becomes of particular interest when you think about some of the problems that we have in both remnant prairies and reconstructed prairies today, which involve the overdominance, especially of some introduced grass species. And so there are folks who are looking into whether some of these hemiparasites could alter those competitive relationships and allow us to maintain more biodiversity in our prairies. Hope that answers your question, your answered question. Yes.
I know there's kind of like a land contractual project. I think the acronym is CREP or PrEP.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that the seeds that you produce, is that a program that uses the seeds you produce, or is that something else?
Wonderful question. So a lot of the agricultural conservation programs like CREP and CRP and oh my goodness, there's a whole alphabet salad of these agricultural conservation programs. A lot of them do require seed. A lot of them are novel plantings, and many of them either recommend or require the use of native species. Not many of them specify the source of that material. And our focus has been on producing source identified seed that is documented to come from Iowa remnant prairies. And those agricultural programs usually don't specify that. There is some recommendation that any ag conservation practice that's put in adjacent to or within a mile of a known remnant prairie should use local ecotype seed. And this would count for that requirement. But I don't know how strongly that is adhered to. But all of that said, I mentioned in here the native seed supply chain and the seed market and the business of selling seed, and that's how we get the seed we need. The stuff that we produce ends up in the hands of native seed producers who may sell it to Christine or to the state DOT, but they're not going to sell all their seed to Christine or the state DOT. They're going to have seed left over, and that seed's going to get sold to whomever on the market will purchase it. And so seed that started in this program can definitely end up in agricultural conservation program plantings. Does that answer that pretty well? My colleagues feeling okay with that one? Because there are colleagues in the room who know a lot more about agricultural conservation plantings than I do. So I'm kind of checking in with them. Yeah, Mallory.
Last question, as we have to wrap up our online Zoom.
Okay.
The question asked by Ed Jacobson, from how many Iowa counties have you collected seeds?
Oh my. Oh, thank you for that question, Ed. Unfortunately, I think that's the one question I can't answer on the fly. Well, I mean, there probably are others, but I can't answer that one on the fly. But let me look into it because I can get back to you on that. I don't think it's going to be all, I know it's not going to be all Iowa counties. But I'm excited. I want to find that number too. So thank you for the question. I'm not even going to ballpark that one. Yeah, Daryl.
I just want to put a little emphasis on that source identified program, because that really provided legitimacy for the Ecotype project. Because prior to that, we were kind of operating on our own.
Yeah. So for those online, Dr. Daryl Smith just wanted to reinforce that message that the source identification was a really important part of this, that it provided legitimacy to this project for getting the remnant source seed into the marketplace. Otherwise, it's just based on, that's where they said it came from, right? Yeah.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Let's thank Laura again. We'll wrap up, but stay around.